But again, your colleagues, some of them saying, look, they were waving their arms around. Isn't it possible that even the act of taking off a T-shirt could have been part of an attempt to get attention for help?
Or it could have been an attempt to signal to another cartel boat to come pick them up and pick up the cargo.
But is there confirmation of what they
Kristen,
were doing
but again,
and what their intentions
for Admiral
were?
Bradley's decision, it doesn't really matter what they were doing. They were on that boat. That boat was still a valid target. And I think what the Democrats object to here is not the second strike, it's the first strike and every other strike
and we are
on all these boats.
Look at Kristen Welker. Look at how excited she is to try to trap not just a pro-Trump senator, but a senator who has spent time in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because, you know, Kristen Welker knows way more about war strategies and striking boats than this guy who's been out in the Middle East. Well, she quickly gets a reality check, and it does not go so well. I bet her producers were pissed. It's Sean Daniel here with the Sunday Marathon. If you enjoy the video, make sure you hit that like button or subscribe. Let's go.
You have two individuals in clear distress without any means of locomotion, with a destroyed vessel, who were killed by the United States.
And joining me now is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who was in those briefings this week, Republican Tom Cotton of Arkansas. Senator Cotton, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks for having me on, Kristen.
Thank you so much for being here after a very big week. I want to ask you about our new reporting. NBC News is reporting this morning that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, his order was to kill all 11 individuals on that boat because they were on a list of narco-terrorists who intelligence and military officials determined could be legally targeted. Was Secretary Hegseth's order to kill everyone on the boat because they were on this target list, Senator?
The order, like the entire operation, Kristen, is to destroy these drug boats, which are running drugs into our country from foreign drug cartels and traffickers that are killing hundreds of Arkansans every year and hundreds of thousands of Americans. Now, of course, before our military conducts such a strike, they have multiple sources of intelligence that give high confidence that everyone on that boat is a foreign drug trafficker, not an innocent civilian who's being human trafficked, for instance. And therefore, Secretary Hegseth said, and I agree, they're all valid targets. Now, this controversy, let's remember, all started with a Washington Post story about 9 days ago that said after the first strike, there were two survivors that were helpless, and then they were ordered to kill these helpless survivors. That is simply not the case. They were not floating in the ocean on a wooden plank or in life jackets. They were on the capsized vessel. They were not incapacitated in any way. It was entirely appropriate to strike the boat again to make sure that cargo was destroyed. It is in no way violation of the law of war. And I think the Washington Post owes Secretary Hegseth, and especially Admiral Mitch Bradley, a highly decorated career Navy SEAL, an apology for that slander.
This is how it works in D.C. sometimes. You get a news outlet like the Washington Post, which we all have the greatest trust in, right? To put out a story because they heard from some source that something happened, and this is kind of how the Russian collusion thing happened in a way. And they put out that story, gets enough traction, and now you have all this pressure in D.C. because then every liberal, for instance, goes on some network, talks about it because you have it as a verifiable, strong story. It's even if it's not verifiable, it's a concrete story in some high authority, well-known publication like the Washington Post. So then they can all cite it. And then there becomes all this pressure in D.C. because this liberal, every network, you know, the DNC networks, CNN, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, they all start pushing the story that has been written and published in the Washington Post over here. And now there's all this pressure on the oversight committees, on the Secretary of Defense, or Secretary of War, as they're calling it now, to explain what happened. This is how it works. And Kristen Welker's a part of that whole machine to put pressure on this one instance, some guy who was helped trafficking drugs. Come on, keep going, Tom.
Okay, and we're going to get to what you saw in the video momentarily, but I just want to be very clear because what you're saying is significant, Senator. It sounds like you're confirming, did Admiral Bradley brief lawmakers that, in fact, all of the people on that boat were on a military target list? Is that accurate?
I did not hear him personally say anything about a military target list. Now, he had several briefings throughout the day. I wasn't in the briefing for instance, with Mark Warner, my counterpart on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I can only say what he told me. He said they had high confidence based on multiple sources of intelligence that everyone on that boat was part of a foreign terrorist organization and been designated by the U.S. government.
So they could be
These drug
legally
cartels.
targeted. They could be lethally and legally targeted,
Yes.
he argued.
Yes.
Okay.
Both before the first strike and after the first strike.
Was Admiral Bradley acting on Secretary Hegseth's orders, Senator?
Well, anytime you have an operation like this, there's an operation order. It's written down. It's got very detailed instructions. I think because this was the first strike, Secretary Hegseth and Admiral Bradley both wanted to be present and be making the decision. As you heard Secretary Hegseth in the opening say, he initiated the first strike. You've seen the video. There's a lot of smoke. It takes a long time to clear. I'm sure Secretary Hegseth had many other matters that he had to attend to, and he trusts Admiral Bradley. Once the smoke had cleared, once cloud cover had cleared, it was clear that the first strike had not destroyed the boat. Then Admiral Bradley made the decision for the second strike. Now, in subsequent strikes since then, because there's been more than 20, obviously it's no longer Secretary Hegseth or even four-star generals making that decision, nor should it be. But on the first strike, I believe they both wanted to be present and be observing it.
That's good for all of us to know these details, that it was a strike. Before we get to the good clips where Tom Cotton is really going after her about the ridiculousness that we need to preserve these people that are known drug traffickers, before we get to that, figure out and understand this timeline. That there was a shooting, the strike, not shooting, and then there's smoke that cleared. Pete Hegseth eventually wasn't there because they're waiting on the smoke to clear. Allegedly, that's the case. And then Admiral Bradley decides to have another strike go into place because the smoke had cleared. Who knows if Pete Hegseth actually left the room, wasn't there. But it's good to have these information before we see how she's going to try to throw some things in Tom Cotton's face, and he's not going to have it. Because why are we defending these drug traffickers?
Let me ask you about the aftermath of that first strike. The Pentagon's Law of War Manual, which you're familiar with, having served in Iraq and Afghanistan, says, quote, orders to fire upon the shipwrecked would be clearly illegal. Given that, how was that follow-on strike of 2 survivors legal, Senator?
Well, again, Kristen, they were not incapacitated. They were not in the water, surviving only because they had a life jacket or hanging to a plank of wood. They were sitting on that boat. They were clearly moving around on it. That is in contrast, for instance, to another strike that Secretary Hegseth described just yesterday in October, in which you had 2 survivors who were in that state. They were essentially just dog paddling in the water. And what happened on that strike? A U.S. vessel went and picked those survivors up and took them back to their home country. That's just an example of how our military makes these decisions based on the facts and circumstances of each particular case, consistent with laws and with the directive you just stated.
I hear you saying they weren't incapacitated, and yet Democratic Congressman Adam Smith of Washington, the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee, saw this very differently. He saw that video. He said, quote, it looks like 2 classically shipwrecked people. Other lawmakers who saw the video said the 2 men appeared to raise their arms, potentially to signal that they were trying to surrender. Senator, why did Admiral Bradley interpret those actions as anything other than these 2 men trying to seek help and survive?
Well, again, they were sitting or standing on top of a capsized boat. They weren't floating helplessly in the water. And Kristen, I don't think it matters all that much what they were trying to do. It looked at one point like they were trying to flip the boat back over, presumably to rescue its cargo and continue their mission.
Or to stay afloat,
maybe they were signaling to other airplanes or drug cartel boats because they're in waters that are just off drug cartel areas. At one point, the guy takes off his T-shirt. Maybe he's trying to get a suntan. It doesn't really matter what they were trying to do. What matters is that they were not in a shipwrecked state, distressed, dog paddling in the water at all. And therefore, that boat, its cargo, and those drug traffickers remained valid targets. And I think what the Democrats object to here is not the second strike, it's the first strike and every other strike
and we are
on all these boats.
We are going to talk about that as well.
Excuse me, I think the Democrats, they're opposed not the second strike, not a third or fourth if there was, but the first one. Wholeheartedly agree there, Tom. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Type in Tom down in the comments if you're watching right now. Tom, so we can show him some love.
Continue to talk about, one of them took off his shirt as if he's trying to suntan. But again, your colleagues, some of them saying, look, they were waving their arms around. Isn't it possible that even the act of taking off a T-shirt could have been part of an attempt to get attention for help?
Or it could have been an attempt to signal to another cartel boat to come pick them up and pick up the cargo.
But is there confirmation of what they
Kristen,
were doing
but again,
and what their intentions
for Admiral
were?
Bradley's decision, it doesn't really matter what they were doing. They were on that boat. That boat was still a valid target. They were not in a state of distress on a plank of wood in the ocean like subsequent survivors were. And when that was the case in October, our military did the right thing. It sent a vessel, it picked them up, it took them back to shore.
You're saying this boat was a threat to the United States, and yet NBC is reporting that Admiral Bradley told the lawmakers the drugs were heading first to Suriname, that's another South American country, and then ultimately to Europe or Africa. How is a boat that's not heading to the United States an imminent threat to this country, Senator?
Well, that's one possibility based on the tactics and techniques that we've observed of these drug cartels. They send smaller boats to sea, and then they link up with a larger boat before they continue their mission. I didn't hear that specifically from Admiral Bradley in my briefing, but what we know is that these drug cartels, which are designated foreign terrorist organizations, are trafficking drugs to our shores. And when we have an opportunity to strike one of these boats, where the intelligence gives us high confidence that everyone on the boat is a valid target because they are associated with these cartels, then I think we need to strike it. Now, there's other cases when we don't have that high confidence, when there might be, for instance, young girls that are being human trafficked, and obviously our military wouldn't take that strike. I think it's much more likely that we're missing some opportunities to strike these boats and protect Americans because we don't have the same high level of confidence.
Senator, is there any hard evidence that shows that this particular boat was headed to the United States?
That didn't come up in my briefing. But again, there's very reliable, multiple sources of intelligence that tells us that this boat had drugs on it, that everyone on that boat was associated with these designated foreign terrorist organizations that are trying to kill American children.
Before we hear another ridiculous question from this woman trying to defend, she's the worst. She's the worst. Because you have known drug traffickers that the military has been able to identify, but they're not necessarily going towards the U.S. So you see guys who are known drug traffickers that have had influence through their drug cartel on drug trade into the U.S., but you see them going to a different shore. So you know what we should do as a military? Even though they might come back and try to harm the U.S. later, you know what we should do? Just let them go to Africa. Let them go to Europe. Even if we see them going somewhere else and know that they're having an impact on trade to the U.S., yeah, just let them go. They're not going directly to the United States. How can we step in? Is this woman that dumb? If she had someone who was attacking her kid, bullying her kid at school, and then on a weekend at the mall, she sees that same kid just going to the mall, not bothering her kid, going to the little ice cream shop, would she not stop the bully and go talk to him? You know, because he's not necessarily bothering her kid right then. It's not school time. This is how dumb she is. And this is how dumb the liberals are who watch these shows and are like, yeah, Kristen, good point.
But are you comfortable having the United States target a boat in which you have not seen evidence that it's actually heading to the United States, that it's an imminent threat?
Any boat loaded with drugs that is crewed by associates and members of foreign terrorist organizations that are trying to kill American kids, I think is a valid target. I'm not just comfortable with it. I want to continue it. Okay,
do you think that the video should be released in full to the American public, as President Trump has said he would support?
So I personally don't have any problem with it. It's not gruesome. I didn't find it distressing or disturbing. It looks like any number of dozens of strikes we've seen on Jeeps and pickup trucks in the Middle East over the years. I will say that the department may have valid concerns about revealing what we know about tactics and techniques that these cartels are using or about our sources or methods. And I would trust Secretary Hegseth and his team to make the decision about whether they can declassify and release the video. But again, there's nothing remarkable about the video, in my opinion.
How dumb would that be to release the video? And then there's a possibility that the drug cartel could get some knowledge on some of the tactics the United States people used, the United States military used to do this strike. They don't need to release the video to just justify it to everyone. But because the Washington Post made this a big deal, and every liberal media like this woman jumped on it and has made a big deal about it, and now you have the Democrats sitting in the hearings and outside the hearings, lying, it's the most heart-wrenching thing I've ever seen. Now they might have to release the video. And like Tom said, I have no problem with them striking that, even twice, 3 times. If you are a part of a drug cartel and we have identified you, just like the bully analogy, there is no reason not to engage. Oh, they're not coming to here. They're going to Morocco. Let's just let them go. What? Because this specific time they're not targeting the United States? Does that mean we shouldn't have gone after bin Laden because at that moment he wasn't planning some strike against the United States? What? The political correctness that has infiltrated these liberals' minds and the mainstream media it's so evil. It's so evil, the ideas they try to promote to us, to everyday Americans, to people around the world, and that if they just continually do it, they beat with a continual strike of these ridiculous framings of questions, it eventually becomes people's ideology, and they start thinking that way, which not only is dangerous for the country and who they vote for, but it's dangerous for their everyday life, because then they start taking this thinking possibly down into their everyday life, like the bully situation I said, where you're way too soft on bullies, for instance. Oh, no, well, he's not bothering you right now. Let's just leave him alone. Do I think that she lives that way in her life? No. But there's other liberal things that they promote on here that are just ridiculous. That after years and years and years of promoting, like not being able to insinuate anything from someone's race, now that's a mainstream idea for a lot of people, which is ridiculous because you can tell a lot by somebody's race, their culture, their traditions, the way they're going to function. The media is the worst. It's Sean Daniel here. If you want to see another video from the Sunday Marathon, check out this video right here. Another liberal getting owned. I have a bunch of them, and I'll see you there.